I've got a fun one for you today. Imagine that you're in Nebraska and you're walking past some cornfields, and all of a sudden the entire field of corn just starts popping out of nowhere. Now, if you're just an innocent bystander, that might seem funny or interesting to you, but if you're the farmer who's depending on that corn for their income, it's not so funny. Well, a similar thing happened in China all the way back in 2011, but with watermelons. Did you hear about this? I actually just found out about it a couple weeks ago, and so that's why I wanted to bring this up today because I think it's really interesting. Back in 2011, China had a big problem with exploding watermelons, where hundreds of watermelons exploded. And apparently, in the area where this happened, this actually happens frequently that some of the watermelons explode. However, because of the circumstances in 2011 with heavy rain, it actually caused over 100 acres of watermelons to explode basically at the same time or in the same time frame. And I just can't imagine that. It's really, really interesting that this happened. And the reason why it happened is because the farmers were using a chemical called, let's see if I can say it, 4-chlorphenuron. 4-chlorphenuron. I think that's how you say it. And if you give too much of that 4-chlorphenuron to a watermelon too soon, and also there's heavy rain, then they're definitely all going to explode. And that's what happened over in China in 2011. And the story is not just sad for the farmer or farmers who lost their cash crop for that season or that year. And it's not just kind of a funny or interesting thing for the rest of us. It also highlights other farming practices around the world, and especially within China, where they're trying to push their crops to the limit. And most places, most companies, most agricultural companies are trying to push their products to the limit. We have a monoculture basically of bananas, where we basically have just grafts that we use to produce bananas instead of having reproduction in other ways. And that means that if there's a disease in those bananas, it could wipe them all out, for example. So that's an example of the West kind of having a farming practice like this that might not be sustainable in the future. And of course, we all know about the Dust Bowl that happened because they didn't rotate the crops a long time ago in the United States. And in China, this also highlighted some other problems that they had in their agriculture. For example, it says here that there were discoveries of heavy metal cadmium in rice, toxic melamine in milk, or melamine, not sure how you say that one, arsenic in soy sauce, bleach in mushrooms, and the detergent borax in pork. And they added that to make it resemble beef. And so this story highlights how human beings have a tendency to try to maximize things. And when you're doing that, of course, there's a law of diminishing returns. And that applies to everything from steroids, like back before steroids were illegal, a lot of bodybuilders were actually taking it with the help of a doctor, and they were doing it correctly. It was pretty safe compared to how people do it now when it's illegal, and they were doing the right dose at the right time, and they had a lot less problems because of that. And now steroids are illegal. People use all kinds of different doses. They probably use too much. They get used to it. They want to have more. They want to grow bigger faster. And so there's a law of diminishing returns with steroids too. And I'm not saying that people are going to explode from that, but definitely they have a lot of problems from using steroids incorrectly. And it's the same thing with water. You know, if you drink too much water, it's not good for you, or you can drown in it. So whenever there's a thing that's good, of course, there's also a law of diminishing returns as well that we have to take into account. And so maximizing the long-term benefit of something is different than trying to blow it up right now. And when it comes to your own garden, you can actually apply this as well when it comes to fertilizer. I didn't know this, but fertilizer can actually hurt your plants. It can burn them because of the salts that are in it. And so what the experts of gardening say is, first of all, use composting instead. That's a lot healthier for your plants, and they tend to respond well to compost. And if you're going to use fertilizer, don't use too much of it too soon. And make sure that it doesn't get on the leaves of your plants because it can burn them. And so we have to be really careful when we're trying to artificially pump up something. Yes, it can help in small quantities at the right time. However, just like the exploding watermelons in China, if you do too much too fast or the conditions change and things get wet, then bad things can happen, including burning your plants. And in the case of China, exploding watermelons. And this kind of reminds me of Idiocracy, if you've seen that, where they're feeding all of the crops Brawndo, because Brawndo, it's what plants crave. This kind of reminds me of that, but in a real way. And again, it's funny for us because we're not these farmers who are depending on it for money. But it is pretty funny. The only difference is in China, they kind of killed all the smart people during their policies of the last 100 years, whereas in Idiocracy, the dumber people are just having more kids. So it's a little bit different, but also kind of the same at the same time. So do not feed your plants Brawndo or too much fertilizer, or you could burn them, or they could even explode. So I didn't hear about this before. I just heard about it a couple weeks ago. I think it's kind of crazy that all of these watermelons exploded. And again, these particular watermelons have pretty thin skin, so it happens quite a bit, but not to the volume and level that it happened back in 2011. And so back in 2011, Gallagher must have taken a break because he didn't need to smash those watermelons. They were already exploded right out in the field. And or maybe he did a show with no hands explosions. That would be kind of cool. And if you're thinking of starting a band, the Smashing Pumpkins is already taken, but I haven't heard of the Exploding Watermelons yet. So there's an idea for you if you want to start a band. And with that, I'm Jim Wolf, and I'll talk to you later.